She called it unconscious. My father's voice split through the apartment intercom at precisely 7 in the morning, raw and cracking with manufactured urgency. On the security monitor mounted beside my kitchen counter, I watched Jared hammering at the downstairs panel, his face contorted in the practice theater of a desperate parent. My mother stood beside him, clutching a handkerchief to her eyes, and my sister Melinda stared directly into the camera lens with a blankness that had always unsettled me. It was all fiction. I was not dying. I was standing at my marble island sipping espresso, watching the 3 people who had spent the better part of a decade trying to break me, attempting to charm their way past a man paid specifically to prevent that. The doorman panicked. He swiped his card. The elevator hummed upward. 42nd floor. I did not dial 911. I did not run. I pressed my fingers against the jagged ridge of scar tissue on my shoulder, a permanent souvenir from the last time Melinda had been handed a kitchen knife and no consequences, and felt something cold and clear settle behind my ribs. They believed they were ambushing a frightened woman who still flinched at raised voices. They had no idea they were walking directly into the end of their own story. I crossed the room and threw the deadbolt open. If your own family appeared at your door demanding you commit a federal crime to rescue them from consequences they earned, would you let them in? Drop your answer in the comments. They did not wait for a spoken invitation. The instant the lock disengaged, the door blew inward with a force that sent it crashing against the wall hard enough to rattle the framed print above the entryway. Jared came first, color riding high in his face, not the flush of fear, but the specific bruised red of a man accustomed to winning, who can feel control slipping through his fingers. Susan followed close behind, her grip on Melinda's arm white-knuckled and proprietary. And Melinda, my composed, calculating sister, was not in any distress whatsoever. Her eyes were already moving across the apartment, cataloging the espresso machine, the skyline, the furnishings, her gaze lit with a covetous hunger she had never bothered to conceal. "You changed your number," Jared snapped, planting himself in the center of my kitchen. "Do you have any concept of the effort it took to track you down?" I leaned back against the island with my arms folded across my chest, less composure than it appeared, more a way to keep my hands from trembling visibly. "You found me," I said. "Say what you came to say and leave." "We are not here for anything selfish," Susan cut in, her voice tuned to a frequency of wounded virtue. "We are here because you owe this family. For once in your life, you are going to show up." She pushed Melinda forward like a piece of evidence. Melinda stumbled, then lifted her face toward me and produced tears with the smooth efficiency of a practiced performer, each one arriving exactly where it would catch the light. "I made a mistake, Katie," she said softly. "A mistake is a parking ticket," I told her. "This sounds considerably larger." Jared's palm came down hard on the counter. She borrowed from the charity account, $180,000. I held his gaze without blinking. "You mean she stole $180,000 from a charitable fund?" "It was a loan," he roared. "She was going to return every cent. But the external audit lands Monday, and we need the records corrected before anyone looks too closely. They had not come to me for cash. They understood I did not have that kind of liquidity sitting idle. They had come because of what I did professionally. I was not simply a woman who had escaped a suffocating household 8 years ago. I was a senior data analyst employed by a forensic auditing firm, and I spent my working hours dismantling the exact kind of digital concealment Melinda needed someone to build for her. They needed me to use my professional credentials to access the charity's financial infrastructure and bury the evidence before Monday morning. And if my answer is no," I said. Melinda's expression shifted. The tears vanished. What replaced them was something quieter and far more dangerous. "Then our father explains to law enforcement that you access the system without authorization," she said, her voice dropping to a register just above a murmur. "You have the technical knowledge. I have the login credentials. Think carefully about who the detectives are going to believe. The devoted volunteer who organizes coat drives, or the estranged sister who earns her living exposing financial criminals. The room tilted slightly. It was architecturally elegant as a trap. They would weaponize my expertise against me, use my own professional history as the motive and the means simultaneously. I looked at all three of them. The father who had watched me bleed and turned the television up. The mother who had stepped around my body on the kitchen floor to reach my sister. The sister who had held the knife. Nausea pushed up through my chest. I needed them out of my space before fear convinced me to do something that would put me in a cell adjacent to theirs. "Fine," I said, and let my voice fracture just enough to be believable. "I will help, but I cannot alter the logs remotely. I need to initiate a transaction to confuse the matching algorithm." Jared exhaled visibly, the posture of a man retaking ground he thought he had lost. "Then do it. Right now." I pulled out my phone. My fingers moved across the screen with the muscle memory of someone who had spent years building complex financial models. I opened my banking application. I navigated to an old contact I had never deleted. Melinda. I entered the amount. $10. In the memo field, I typed, "Federal Wire Fraud Facilitation Fee, transaction number 1. I pressed send. The notification sounded on Melinda's phone. She looked down at the screen with genuine confusion pulling at her brow. $10? What is this supposed to mean? I turned my phone around and held the screen where all three of them could read it clearly. "That is a digital paper trail," I said, and my voice found its footing again, leveling into something steady and precise. "I just transferred funds across state lines directly attached to an admitted criminal act. By accepting that deposit, you did not merely embezzle from a local charity. You participated in wire fraud. I did not clean the records. I handed the FBI a receipt with your full names printed on it." Jared's complexion moved through several shades before settling on something close to ash. "Now," I said, and extended my arm toward the door. "Get out of my apartment before I forward this screenshot to the district attorney's office." I believed that was the end of it. I believed I had won. Jared did not argue. The suggestion of federal involvement has a reliable effect on people who have been operating with unchecked impunity, even those whose self-regard is essentially boundless. He turned a color I had no name for, seized Melinda by the arm, and pulled her toward the hallway. Susan followed in a hurrying shuffle, her handbag clutched against her chest like a life preserver. "You will regret this," Jared threw back over his shoulder, but the words had lost their architecture. They sounded like something he had rehearsed for a scene that had not played out the way he expected. I followed them to the threshold, my hand rising toward the heavy brass deadbolt. Every nerve in my body focused on the moment I could slide it home again and seal my life back shut. I watched them step onto the corridor carpet. I exhaled. 8 years of held breath. Then Melinda stopped. Not a hesitation, not a slowing down. She stopped with the deliberate finality of a decision already made, feet planted like she had taken root. She was 3 feet in front of me, framed in the open doorway. She turned her head. The tears were entirely gone. The vulnerability was entirely gone. Her face had cleared into a smooth, expressionless blankness that was somehow worse than anger, because anger at least suggested something human underneath. She found my eyes and smiled. It was not a warm expression. It was the particular smile of something that has just located exactly what it came for. "You should not have sent that money, Katie," she whispered. She reached forward with both hands, gripped the steel door frame, braced herself with her full body weight, and drove her face into the solid metal jamb with everything she had. The sound was wet and terrible, the sound of something structural giving way. Blood erupted from her nose in a spray that crossed the white hallway wall and landed across my shirt. She did not pull back. She did it again. And then she threw her head back and screamed, a high sustained shriek that punched down the elevator shaft and into every apartment on the floor. "Kate, stop," she wailed, her voice scaling upward into raw performance. "Please, please do not hurt me anymore." My brain could not process the sequence fast enough to assign it meaning. One instant she had been standing there intact, and in the time it took me to blink, she was on the floor, writhing and bleeding, both hands cupped over her ruined face. Jared and Susan did not react with shock. There was no freeze, no horror, no instinctive reaching for their injured daughter. They moved with the coordinated efficiency of people who had run this drill before. "Help!" Susan screamed, and the register of it was something beyond human distress, something calibrated specifically to travel through walls and closed doors. "She is attacking her. She is killing my daughter." "Police!" Jared roared simultaneously, arm extended, finger aimed at me with courtroom certainty. "She has a weapon. Somebody help." I stood in my own doorway with my hands reaching for a lock that was suddenly irrelevant. "What?" I choked. "I did not." Ping. The elevator doors directly behind them slid open. They did not open for a neighbor returning from an early errand. They opened for two uniformed NYPD officers, tactical lights already up, weapons already drawn. They did not assess the scene. They saw a woman on the floor screaming and another woman standing over her, and they made the calculation that the geometry demanded. "Hands," the lead officer commanded. "Show me your hands right now." "I did not touch her," I said, both arms going up. "She did this to herself. If you check the camera in the hall, get on the ground, now." He did not wait for compliance. He came past my sobbing mother at a controlled run and took me down. I hit my own hardwood floor hard enough that the air left my body completely. My cheek pressed into the boards I had saved for, chosen, paid for in the one space in the world that had ever belonged only to me. "Suspect secured," he reported into his radio. I felt the handcuffs ratchet closed around my wrists, and pain shot up through my arms and gathered in the scar tissue at my shoulder. "She is mentally unstable," Jared was already telling the second officer, his voice thick with theatrical distress. "I called your department 10 minutes ago. I reported her. Thank God you arrived when you did. She would have killed all of us." And then the understanding arrived, not gradually, but all at once, the way a broken bone announces itself. 10 minutes ago. Jared had not called the police in response to any noise or confrontation. He had called them before he ever stepped into my elevator. He had filed a report describing a violent situation before a single word had passed between us. This had not been improvised. Every element, the embezzlement, the demand for access, the threat of a frame job, had existed only to get them into my apartment at a specific time. The real mechanism was the one I was currently experiencing face down on my own floor. They had reported me before the scene existed and then manufactured the scene to match the report. "Please." Melinda was sobbing from the hallway, blood moving steadily through her fingers. She wanted money. She said she would hurt me if I did not give her everything I had. I tried to lift my head. That is not true. Look at the transfer record. Check the timestamp. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer said, hauling me upright by my arms. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Susan stood with her arms wrapped around Melinda, one hand moving through her daughter's hair, her own eyes perfectly, entirely dry. Jared positioned himself near the elevator bank, nodding slowly at the officers with the steady gravity of a man who has reluctantly been proven right about a troubled member of his family. As they walked me down the corridor in my socks, Jared caught my eye across the distance between us. He closed one eye. A single, slow, unhurried wink. The door to my apartment sealed itself behind me. This time I was standing on the wrong side of it. The holding cell operated on a philosophy of sustained discomfort. The temperature was positioned somewhere just below the threshold where dignity becomes negotiable, and confession starts to seem like it might at least come with a blanket. It smelled of industrial cleaner and accumulated human suffering, and something metallic underneath both of those. I sat on the bench with my knees drawn to my chest and fixed my attention on the steel fixture in the corner, while the phantom pressure of the handcuffs continued burning around my wrists. When the officer had guided my head into the squad car doorframe, the impact had bypassed cognition entirely and delivered me somewhere else without asking permission. I was not 24 in a police holding cell in Manhattan. I was 16 on a linoleum kitchen floor in Ohio, with my shoulder open and my shirt soaking through, and the specific animal understanding that something important had just been permanently altered. The memory had no visual component. It arrived as sensation. The warmth of my own blood moving through fabric. The vibration of footsteps approaching across the floor. I had believed she was coming to help. I had reached upward with the arm that still functioned, my fingers red and slick. Susan had not stopped. She had not knelt. She had stepped across my body with the unhurried ease of someone avoiding a puddle, continued to where Melinda stood at the sink, still holding the carving knife and crying because the altercation had chipped one of her nails. "Shh, sweetheart," Susan had murmured, folding Melinda into her arms, turning her back to me completely. "We will make sure nothing happens to you. Katie upset you. That is not something you should ever have to carry." That was the moment the chain went around my neck. Psychologists have a clinical term for what that kind of repeated experience does to a nervous system. I think of it differently. I think of it as the invisible restraint, the mechanism that rewires your responses until your body no longer believes that resistance produces anything except additional injury. It explained why, when the officers came through my doorway this morning, I had gone completely still. I had not said, "Check the cameras." I had not said, "Look at the angle of the blood." My body had remembered the lesson from the kitchen floor and applied it without consulting me. You are the liability. You are the variable they eliminate. The only viable strategy is silence and smallness. For an hour on that bench, I let it work on me. I sat inside the fear and let it do what it was built to do, which was convince me that everything I had built and earned and protected had been taken in a single morning by people who had been practicing this specific operation my entire life. Then I looked at my hands. They were shaking, yes, but they were also the hands of a woman who typed 70 words per minute and had spent years building the kind of algorithmic frameworks that could locate hidden money in financial structures deliberately designed to be invisible. These were not the hands of the girl who bled on the kitchen floor. I pulled air into my lungs deliberately, held it, let it out, and did it again until the trembling settled. They believed they had reinserted me into their story. They believed this was another version of the kitchen floor where they authored the narrative, and I absorbed the consequences in silence. But they had miscalculated in one significant way. We were not in their kitchen. We were inside the New York criminal justice system. And in this system, documentation carries more weight than tears. I stood up from the bench. I did not break the chain. I snapped it. The fear did not dissipate gently. It converted. Cold, focused, precise. I walked to the bars and rattled them until the guard looked up from his desk. "I want my phone call," I said. My voice did not waver. It moved off the concrete and came back harder than I sent it. "You calling your mother?" the guard said without particular interest. "No," I said. "I am calling my attorney. His name is Mr. Vance, and I would suggest moving with some intention because he bills at $600 an hour and he has no patience for waiting." The guard looked up. He took a real look, the kind he had not bothered with when I arrived, and apparently found something in my posture that rearranged his priorities. He reached for his keys. The interrogation room had been designed by someone who understood that bare surfaces and poor lighting do specific things to the human capacity for patience. Cinder block walls in a color that suggested someone had mixed beige with institutional regret, a steel table anchored to the floor, a two-way mirror humming with the quiet judgment of whoever stood on the other side. I sat with my hands flat on the table and watched Detective Miller arrange himself across from me. He had the particular exhaustion of a man who had heard every available variation of human dishonesty and found none of them surprising anymore. He opened a folder and slid it across the metal surface. It stopped precisely in front of my hands. "Your family provided a very thorough account, Ms. Vance," he said, settling back. "According to their collective testimony, you have an established pattern of volatile behavior. They state you arrived at the apartment this morning demanding $180,000 to cover losses from illegal gambling. When your sister declined, the situation escalated. You drove her face into the door frame yourself." He paused, watching for the response most people offered at this juncture: the raised voice, the tears, the immediate defensive collapse. I gave him none of those things. I was done reacting to the script. I was auditing it. "Gambling debts," I said. "That is the story they chose. That is the narrative," he confirmed. Witness corroboration from all three of them. Physical injury consistent with assault. Established motive. Clean and complete. It is a production, I said, and not a particularly careful one. I leaned forward. I did not look at him the way a person in custody looks at law enforcement. I looked at him the way I look at a set of financial records when a figure does not reconcile. Detective, I am going to assume you pulled the dispatch logs from the 911 call. He said he had, with the slight irritation of someone who does not enjoy being managed. What time was the call received by dispatch? He consulted his notes. 9:14. Officers arrived at your floor at 9:17. Quick response. Unit was close by. I said yes. Then I asked whether he had pulled the access logs from my building. He asked why I thought that was relevant. Because, I said, those records will show that my doorman did not swipe anyone through the elevator until 9:15. I let that land where it needed to land. Which means my father contacted emergency services 60 seconds before anyone in that family was physically present in my building. Miller's posture changed. That is premeditation, I said quietly. He was not reporting something he witnessed. He was executing a prepared script. He placed the call before there was anything to report because the incident was not a response to something that happened. It was a scheduled event. Before he could respond, the door opened with a sharp buzz and my attorney walked in. Expensive suit, older money, no wasted acknowledgement of Detective Miller. He looked directly at me. Stop speaking, Kate, he said. We need a moment alone. Miller rose. Take whatever time you need. We just finished executing the search warrant on your apartment. He left and the door sealed behind him. Did you tell them about the server? I said immediately. The backup footage should confirm everything. Vance pulled out his chair and sat down with the deliberate calm of someone about to deliver news that cannot be softened. Kate, he said, there is no footage. My stomach dropped with the specific weight of something structural failing. The server was destroyed on site. Fire extinguisher. Your father is claiming you did it to eliminate evidence of the assault before officers arrived. He knew exactly where the cameras were. He had been in my apartment before, once, 7 years ago, standing in the living room while I tried to convince him that leaving had not been an act of cruelty. He had been cataloging the space even then. There is more, Vance said. Melinda provided an additional statement this afternoon. The prosecution's position on the $10 transfer is that it constitutes a test payment. Evidence that you were establishing the mechanics of the extortion before demanding the full amount. Without the footage, I was facing 3 coordinated witnesses, no physical evidence in my favor, and a professional history that the prosecution would frame as the skill set of someone capable of exactly the crime they were describing. They are going to prevail, I said. There is a plea offer, Vance replied. 5 years with cooperation. Without the footage, trial exposure is 15 to 20. The silence in the room had a specific quality. Then something shifted. The $10, I said. Open your laptop. Kate, we should focus on the plea timeline. I am a data analyst, I said. I do not trust hardware that I cannot verify. Open the laptop and connect through your own hotspot. He looked at me for a moment and then did it. Real-time encrypted cloud sync, he said quietly, reading something on the screen. Yes, I said. The door opened again and Miller came back in with the practiced neutrality of someone carrying a document that has already been approved at multiple levels. He set the plea agreement on the table in front of me. Ready to move forward? Vance turned the laptop around and positioned it so the screen faced the detective. Sit down, he said. Miller sat. He pressed play. The footage was clean. The hallway camera had captured everything at a resolution that left no interpretive room. It showed me at the door. It showed the deadbolt. It showed Jared steering Melinda toward the elevator while Susan moved ahead of them. Then it showed Melinda stopping. It showed her turn. It captured audio with enough clarity to hear her say the words. It showed both hands going to the door frame. It showed the deliberate force of the first impact. The second, it showed Jared's voice. Coaching. Harder. We need visible bruising. It showed Susan counting down under her breath. It showed the screaming begin exactly on cue. Miller had gone the color of old paper. "That constitutes filing a false police report," he said, almost to himself. "Conspiracy, obstruction of justice." "Pause the footage at 9:12, I said. The image froze, with me holding the phone screen, visible to all three of them, the transfer confirmation clearly readable. "The initial theft was state level," I said, "charity fund, Ohio jurisdiction. But the $10 transfer moved across state lines, New York originating, New Jersey receiving." Miller looked at me. "That is wire fraud," I said. "Interstate. Federal jurisdiction, and the footage documents all three of them operating in active coordination toward a common criminal objective. That is a conspiracy under RICO statutes. Minimum exposure is 20 years. Miller was already on his feet, reaching for his radio before I finished the sentence. "Get federal on the line right now," he said into it. "I need 3 arrests staged from this building immediately." I did not watch what came next with any particular satisfaction. I watched it the way I watch a set of accounts finally reconcile after a long discrepancy. Jared was loudest, as he always had been. Susan screamed something about knowing people. Melinda stood completely still and said nothing at all, which was somehow the most honest any of them had ever been in my presence. The restraints went on all three of them in succession. "Let's get you home," Vance said from beside me. 3 days later, the apartment was what it was always supposed to be. The city moved at its usual pace beyond the glass. The news was running the segment again: federal indictment, wire fraud, racketeering conspiracy, 3 defendants remanded without bail. Their photographs were on screen. I stepped out onto the balcony with the wine I had planned to open the night this began, poured a glass, and stood with it for a while. It tasted like the specific quiet that arrives after something has been resolved that should have been resolved a long time ago. I went back inside and opened my phone. I deleted their names one at a time. I had spent 24 years constructing reasons why my existence should register as worthwhile to people who had already decided it would not. In the end, the only thing I proved was that my worth was denominated in something they would never be able to touch. If you are holding on to people who hollow you out because you share a bloodline with them, I want you to hear this directly. Let go. It might be the decision that saves you.